Snow swept through the forest in cold, silent waves when a tiny white German Shepherd puppy limped out from the darkness. Its fur was dusted in ice, its breaths shallow, yet it moved with a strange purpose, straight toward Navy SEAL Ethan Grayson as he advanced through the winter woods on a covert mission. The puppy stopped at his boots, trembling, releasing a thin sound that shouldn't have carried through the storm, but somehow reached him. Ethan knelt. Something about this little survivor felt like a warning, or a plea, and as he stepped after it, the night quietly shifted, like destiny had just found him. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, subscribe for more tales of courage, sacrifice, and the bonds that refuse to break. Your support truly means the world. Winter pressed down on the border pines like a silent white tide. Snow blanketed the slopes of White Mesa Forest, turning the New Mexico highlands into a maze of frozen ridgelines and skeletal spruce. The wind sliced through the trees in sharp, restless drafts, rattling branches like bones shaken in a warning. Beneath the pale sky, the world felt suspended, untouched, unwelcoming, watching. Navy SEAL Ethan Cross, 35, moved through the timberline with the stillness of a hunter carved from the cold itself. He was tall, powerfully built, with shoulders hardened by years of breaching doors and carrying wounded men through dust-filled streets overseas. His jaw was strong, dusted with a short, dark beard that framed a mouth usually set in a firm, unreadable line. His eyes, gray with a faint blue tint, held a quiet tension, the look of someone who had memorized the weight of loss rather than spoken about it. Tonight he was deep into a covert reconnaissance operation for SEAL Team 5, tracking the faint signs of a narcotics transport route rumored to cut through this remote border forest. His gear was stripped to essentials: suppressed rifle, fixed blade knife, encrypted radio, satellite phone, thermal goggles. Every few steps he paused, letting the forest speak or refuse to. Ethan had spent 13 years in the SEALs. He had seen men break under heat and mortar fire, had carried brothers whose breaths faded against his shoulder, but nothing had carved itself deeper into him than the memory of Ranger, his military working dog. The German Shepherd had been his partner through 2 deployments, loyal, brilliant, fearless. Ranger died shielding Ethan during a night ambush in Kunar Province, taking shrapnel that should have pierced Ethan's throat. Ethan was unconscious when it happened. When he woke, someone had laid Ranger's paw across his chest like a final oath. Since that day, grief had wrapped itself around him like a second uniform, silent, disciplined, tightly fitted. Tonight, the forest felt too much like the memory of that night, too still, too expectant. He crouched beside a faint pair of tire tracks half buried beneath fresh snow. The engine he thought he'd heard earlier was now gone, swallowed by wind. He clicked his radio twice, silent code for continuing forward, and rose again. Then he froze. A sound threaded through the wind, thin, tremulous, almost swallowed by the cold. Not an echo, not a branch. Something alive, something small. Ethan lowered himself behind a fallen log, one knee pressed into the snow, pulse steady. He waited. The sound came again, soft, desperate, a tiny quiver of breath. A whine, trying to be louder, but failing. He scanned the shadows. Under a pine whose branches bent low with ice, something white moved. A small shape limped into view. A German Shepherd puppy, no more than 5 weeks old, its fur a pure, startling white that almost vanished into the snow. One front paw was scraped and raw. The pup favored it, stumbling every few steps. Frost clung to its whiskers and the tips of its ears. Its breaths came out in uneven clouds. But it was the eyes that stopped Ethan cold, wide, dark, glassy with fear, but fixed directly on him, as if it had been searching for him. "What in the hell?" he whispered, voice low but shaken at the edges. The pup took one halting step toward him, then another. It released a tiny, broken sound, somewhere between a whimper and something shaped, something that trembled with intention. Not quite a word, but not quite an ordinary cry either. Ethan stiffened. He had spent years around military K-9 units. He knew the range of sounds a dog could make. This one felt wrong, or too right, too directed, almost like… He cut the thought off. Grief made men imagine things, and the cold made imagination louder. The pup stumbled again, collapsing weakly into the snow before dragging itself upright. Its little chest heaved as it looked up at him with a pleading so raw it sent an unexpected pang through Ethan's ribs. He stood there, unmoving. Training told him to leave it. A lone puppy in a restricted border zone made no sense. It could be bait, a distraction. Nothing here happened without a reason. But another part of him, the part still kneeling in Afghanistan with Ranger's lifeless paw across his chest, took a single step forward. "Easy," he murmured, lowering his rifle. "I'm not gonna hurt you." The puppy's ears twitched. It let out another quiver of sound, higher this time, thin but strangely steady, as if trying to form something. The tone prickled along Ethan's nerves. He crouched, extending a gloved hand. The pup wobbled toward him, then pressed its tiny head against his palm. Warmth, weak but stubbornly alive. Ethan felt his breath hitch in a way he hadn't allowed in years. "What are you doing out here?" he whispered. The puppy trembled harder, pushing its body against his boot, looking back over its shoulder into the darkness, like it wanted him to follow. Ethan's instincts surged, every part of him tightening with caution. Something was wrong, something nearby. He swept the forest with a slow, disciplined glance. Nothing but snow, silence, and the hint of danger curling beneath it. But the puppy took another step away, looked back, whined, a trembling, pleading sound. Ethan exhaled, frost drifting from his lips. Against every rule of the mission, against every instinct drilled into him, he rose and followed the tiny white shadow into the trees. And in that moment, the night shifted, quietly, decisively, toward a fate he never saw coming. Snow thickened as Ethan cross-followed the tiny white puppy through the twisting timber line. The wind sharpened with every step, blowing sideways across the slope and dragging icy needles against his face. The pup limped ahead, determined despite its small body trembling with fatigue. Every few strides it paused, glancing back, whining softly, then pushing forward as if pleading for Ethan to understand a message it couldn't fully shape. Then it happened again. The puppy stumbled, braced itself, lifted its tiny head, and released a broken sound. Elp. It wasn't a word, but it wasn't random either. The pitch, the rhythm, the desperate quaver. Ethan had heard men scream that exact syllable on radios during firefights. Something ancient inside him tightened. Logic told him the noise was only coincidence. Stress, wind, and memory could twist any sound into ghosts. But instinct, the instinct that had saved his life through years of reconnaissance, whispered something else entirely. Someone is out there, and they need you. The puppy let out another wavering cry, higher, sharper, like urgency pressed into sound. Ethan exhaled once, cold fog spilling into the night. "All right," he murmured, voice low and steady. "Show me." He kept his rifle angled, scanning left and right. Tracks appeared beneath the snow, faint tire grooves, cut shallow as if the vehicle had been moving fast. The edges of the tracks suggested a sudden swerve, then a drift. He crouched, brushing frost away. Beneath the ice, something darker stained the crust. Engine oil, maybe. And smoke. Not much, barely a whisper carried on the wind, but enough for a seasoned operator to know someone had crashed. The puppy limped faster, now letting out short, clipped sounds. Hep! Hep! As if urging him on. Ethan's pulse quickened. He moved swiftly now, boots carving deep prints into the drifts. The forest narrowed into a bend of leaning pines. Beyond them, the land dropped away. That's where he saw it. A forest ranger pickup, painted the familiar matte green of federal patrol units, lay on its side at the edge of a steep embankment. The front end was crushed against a boulder, steam rising in thin ribbons. The windshield was shattered outward, and the passenger side door had folded like paper. Snow gathered inside the cracked frame, melting crimson where it touched blood. A woman was trapped inside. She appeared to be in her late 20s, maybe early 30s. Tall, athletic, with olive-toned skin and a long braid of dark brown hair undone by the crash. Her face, sharp cheekbones, straight nose, was smeared with dried blood, and one eyebrow bore a gash where she had hit the console. Her ranger uniform, a heavy winter jacket with forest green patches, was torn at the shoulder, revealing pale skin mottled by bruises. Her left leg was twisted beneath the dashboard. Her right hand pressed weakly against her ribs as she struggled to breathe. Her badge read, Maya Reyes. Her eyes fluttered open when Ethan approached. Even in her pain, there was a fierceness in them, the kind of resolve only those who worked alone in the wilderness carried. Yet there was also fear, softened by the storm around her. Hey, stay with me, Ethan said, dropping into action. Behind her, in the rear housing of the truck, a wooden crate had been smashed open by the impact. Inside, 2 German shepherd puppies, black and tan, about 5 weeks old, huddled in a trembling heap. One had a white patch on its chest. The other had a small nick in its left ear. Both were terrified, their tiny bodies shaking violently. The white puppy, the one that had found Ethan, ran to the crate and scratched at it frantically, whining louder now, almost rhythmic. That same strange, urging sound. Ethan holstered his rifle and checked the truck's frame. The fuel line dripped but hadn't ignited. Good. He switched off the battery, then broke the rest of the windshield with his knife handle. Maya, can you hear me? He asked. Her lips moved. Don't leave them. Her voice was soft but firm, urgent. I won't, he promised. He slid his arms through the broken window frame, cutting the seatbelt with his tactical blade. Snow dusted his forearms as he lowered her carefully, mindful of her leg. She cried out once, clenching her jaw hard. Ethan steadied her neck, feeling her pulse, weak, thready, cold. He pulled her free with a smooth, practiced lift and laid her on a patch of cleared snow. The moment her body touched the ground, the white puppy pressed itself against her arm, nuzzling her wrist, releasing a trembling sound, high, sustained, almost like a plea not to drift away. Ethan didn't waste time. He tore open his medical pouch. Combat gauze, packed tightly into her thigh wound. Tourniquet, applied above the swelling, tightened until the bleeding slowed. Thermal blanket, wrapped around her frame, tucked under her shoulders to preserve heat. Airway check, clear. Breathing, shallow but present. Circulation, weak but responsive when stimulated. He looked to the 2 black and tan puppies. One whimpered softly, the other stared wide-eyed, its tiny chest rising fast with panic. They were unharmed but freezing. He scooped them quickly into the folds of his jacket. The white puppy circled around Maya again, raking its paw against the snow, whining in a strange cadence. Help. Ethan's chest tightened. It was impossible, irrational, but the sound had guided him to this exact point, to this exact second, where a life hung between 2 breaths. Yeah, he whispered to the pup. I hear you. He lifted Maya into his arms, one hand supporting her head, the other under her knees, feeling her shiver against him, her breath ghosted against his neck. She was alive, but fading. He turned toward the darker stretch of forest where a helicopter could safely land. Time was already running out, and in the snow at his feet, the small white puppy looked up at him once more, eyes bright, urgent, as if saying the only thing its tiny body knew how to shape, don't stop now. Snow hammered the treetops with a steady, merciless rhythm as Ethan Cross tightened the poncho straps across Maya Reyes's torso. The ranger's breath trembled against his neck, shallow, fragile, but still fighting. He pulled the last knot firm, testing its hold. Years of carrying wounded teammates through mountains in Afghanistan and the Horn of Africa had carved the motion into his muscle memory, but this forest felt different. This woman felt different. 3 tiny lives in his arms made it feel different. The 2 black and tan German Shepherd puppies were tucked inside his jacket, each no heavier than a canteen. They peeked out in confused fear, their small paws gripping at the fabric. The white puppy, limping but determined, stayed pressed to Ethan's boot as if guarding both him and Maya. The forest around them was a labyrinth of slick ice and jutting roots. Helicopter landing was impossible here. Ethan had already swept the horizon. No clearing large enough, no break in the branches thick enough to allow rotor blades through. They needed open sky. He clicked on the satellite phone. A static pulse, then a secure tone. "Cross to forward post Raven," he said, voice crisp despite the cold. "Priority medevac. 1 critical. Coordinates transmitting now. Possible link to cartel transport route. Details follow once patient stabilized." The operator acknowledged, calm and professional. Ethan ended the call, slipped the device into his chest rig, and bent forward to shift Maya's weight evenly across his back. Her arms fell around his shoulders, limp. Her cheek brushed his collarbone, cold as stone. "All right, Reyes," he murmured. "Stay with me." The white puppy let out a soft, warbling cry, nudging her boot as if echoing the command. Ethan started up the slope. Each step was a battle against slick ice and deep snow pockets. The terrain slanted unpredictably, making every foothold uncertain. He knew how quickly rescuers became casualties when panic overrode discipline, so he kept his breathing steady, movements methodical. Roots jutted from the frozen ground like the knuckles of giants. Ethan stepped over them, letting the puppies shift inside his jacket. Their tiny claws dug into him with nervous tremors, an odd and strangely comforting counterpoint to the relentless storm. "Easy, little ones," he whispered. The white puppy trotted beside him, sometimes sliding on the icy patches, sometimes pausing to whine in a way that sounded like it wished it could take some of the weight from him. After 20 grueling minutes, the forest began to thin. The slope broadened. There, a clearing. Snow churned freely in the open, swirling into a luminous haze beneath the moonless sky. Ethan scanned the canopy. The gap was just wide enough. He set Maya down gently, using his jacket as padding beneath her head. Her lips were pale, breathing weaker than before. He took a signal flare from his pack, cracked it with a sharp twist, and tossed it onto the snow. The red arc burned like a falling star. Minutes later, the distant thump of helicopter blades rolled through the air, slow at first, then building into a steady, rhythmic churn. The wind intensified as the aircraft approached, pushing the tree line into a frantic shiver. Ethan shielded the puppies with his arm. Snow erupted in spirals as the SEAL Team 5 medevac helicopter descended, its searchlight cutting a white corridor through the storm. 2 crew members jumped out as soon as skids touched snow. One was Sergeant Cole Whitman, a stocky crew chief with a square jaw, weathered skin, and a thick brown mustache trimmed with military precision. His voice was gravel-deep, shaped by years of hauling wounded soldiers out of places darker than night. Despite the harsh exterior, he had a reputation in the unit for treating every casualty, human or animal, with unexpected gentleness. The second was Nurse Specialist Dana Holloway, mid-30s, tall and lean, with warm brown skin and tightly braided black hair tucked under her helmet. Her eyes were steady, the sort of calm that came from losing people and deciding to fight harder anyway. They knelt beside Ethan without wasting a second. "What's her status?" Dana asked, checking Maya's pulse. "Fading. Internal bleeding likely. Stabilized her leg. 2 black GSD pups uninjured, white ones limping." Dana's gaze flicked to the white puppy who stood guarding Maya's hand. "You're a brave little thing, aren't you?" The puppy gave a trembling whine. Within seconds, Maya was lifted onto a stretcher secured and carried into the helicopter. Ethan climbed in after, settling against the bulkhead with the 3 pups wrapped in an emergency blanket of silver foil. Inside, the roar of the storm was replaced by the deep, rhythmic hum of rotors. Dana leaned over Maya, attaching oxygen, checking vitals, preparing transfusion lines. Cole hovered by the cabin door, scanning instruments, barking readings into his headset. Maya's eyelids fluttered. "Hey, miss," Dana whispered. "Stay with us." The white puppy lifted its head. Something changed in the air, subtle but unmistakable. "Hey." The sound left its small throat in a quavering syllable. Not perfect, not human, but undeniably deliberate. Dana froze mid-movement. Cole's hand paused on the latch. Even the pilot's voice stuttered in the headset. Ethan met their stunned gazes. "You heard that too," he said quietly. No one answered, but no one denied it. Maya's breathing faltered then, dipping sharply. Her head fell to the side, eyes rolling half-closed. "No, no, stay with me," Dana urged, adjusting the mask. The white puppy scrambled free of the blanket, crawled onto Maya's chest and pressed its cold muzzle to her cheek. Then it released a series of shaky, rising notes. "Hey, hey, hey." Each sound matched the shape and rhythm of Dana's voice moments earlier, as if the puppy was trying to repeat the command that kept Maya tethered to consciousness. Maya reacted. Her eyelashes fluttered. A weak groan slipped out. Her pulse steadied. Just enough. Ethan felt something tighten painfully in his chest. Hope, fear, awe. It was impossible to separate them. The helicopter landed at the SEAL Forward Medical Facility. Maya was rushed to surgery, her stretcher rolling through double doors and disappearing into a blinding corridor of white light. Ethan stood with the puppies in his arms as the surgeon, a middle-aged man with silver stubble and tired, empathetic eyes, pulled off his gloves. "If you'd arrived 2 hours later," the doctor said, voice low with sincerity, "she wouldn't have made it through the night." That little white pup kept her conscious long enough to save her brain function. It bought her time we desperately needed. Ethan looked down at the trembling bundle of fur pressed against his chest. The puppy blinked up at him. Not just a survivor, not just a stray. Something more, something no training in the world had prepared him to understand. The storm eased by midnight, but the air around the SEAL Forward Medical Post still felt stretched thin, heavy with adrenaline, antiseptic, and the echo of things too close to losing. Word traveled fast inside military compounds. Whispers moved through corridors long before orders did, and now the newest rumor spread like wildfire. A white German shepherd puppy had mimicked a human word on a rescue flight. Some dismissed it as exhaustion. Some swore they would have believed it from anyone except Ethan Cross, the quiet operator whose feet were rooted more in pragmatism than fantasy. But none of it mattered to him. Not tonight. Tonight, 3 5-week-old puppies shivered in a heated recovery room, and the woman who nearly died lay unconscious behind glass, clinging to the thin thread the white puppy had bought her. Ethan had asked to stay behind. Officers rarely questioned him. His service record carried a weight of its own. So they cleared the small utility room beside Maya's ward, rolled in a portable heater, and laid out blankets. Ethan slipped out of his tactical jacket, kneeling beside the trembling bundles of fur. The white one pressed itself onto his thigh immediately, its tiny claws catching on the fabric, its breathing uneven but eager. The 2 black and tan pups were curled together, their little bodies rising and falling in shaky unison. Ethan rubbed warmth into his hands, then reached for the first puppy. His movements were practiced, steady, precise, but his touch was gentler than he'd ever used on anything made of flesh. He checked their extremities for frostbite the way he had once checked rangers' paws after winter patrols in the mountains. He warmed their ears and bellies with careful pressure of his palms. He dabbed melting snow from their fur using a sterile cloth. A young SEAL corpsman, Private Liam Harper, peeked in through the doorway. He was about 19, freckle-faced, with sandy hair and a perpetual look of awe toward operators like Ethan. "Sir," Liam said, trying and failing not to smile, "I've never seen a Tier 1 guy hold a puppy like it's a live grenade." Ethan grunted, not looking up. "They're small." "Sir, they're tiny." "Exactly." Liam laughed before being waved away by a senior nurse, leaving Ethan to the quiet rhythm of the room. He fetched a bottle of warmed formula and an eyedropper. It wasn't elegant, puppy rescue rarely was, but it worked. The first black and tan puppy latched immediately, overeager, almost inhaling the milk. Ethan steadied its head so it wouldn't choke. "You're trouble," he muttered. The second black and tan pup remained curled in the blanket's corner. Its fur was darker, shading almost sable along the flank, and its eyes were rounder, softer, a timid look, as though the world had already shown it too much. Ethan reached out, palm upward. The pup hesitated, then crawled slowly into his hand, collapsing with a faint whimper. Ethan fed it gently, watching its breathing slow, deepen. This one wasn't weak, just cautious, hyper-aware, sensitive. Then came the white puppy. It didn't wait for his hand. It climbed his chest, tiny paws pushing, claws clicking against his undershirt until it reached the hollow beneath his collarbone. There, it settled with a determined little grunt, staring directly into his eyes. Snow-white fur, ink-black eyes, a strange, bright alertness. Ethan felt something unexpected stir in his chest. "Okay," he whispered. "You're first, then." He fed it by dropper. The puppy sucked eagerly, occasionally pulling back to make a sound, half whine, half vowel, that made Ethan freeze each time. It wasn't imitation now. It wasn't trying to speak. It was simply watching his mouth, mimicking the shapes unconsciously, the way some dogs mirrored their handler's posture. Still, every soft "heh" felt like a question aimed directly at him. Hours passed. Ethan dried them, massaged life back into their paws, and wrapped them in emergency wool. At one point, the heater flickered. He shifted all 3 pups inside his jacket, letting his body heat replace technology. That was when a few operators from the midnight shift arrived at the doorway. 2 were tall, broad-shouldered breachers. One was a radio specialist with a crooked nose and a grin that looked permanently mischievous. Another was a female logistics tech, short, compact, with sharp hazel eyes, who leaned against the doorframe like she'd discovered something rare. All 4 watched Ethan. Quiet, stoic, battle-scarred Ethan trying to hold 3 wiggling puppies without dropping a single one. The sight nearly broke them. "Sir," the radio tech gasped, wiping tears of laughter. "Please, tell me someone got a photo." Ethan glared, but his glare had no weight tonight. Not with a white puppy pawing at his chin. He tried to place the pups in the blanket again, but every time he set the white one down, it climbed right back onto him. "Persistent little thing," he murmured. Near dawn, footsteps echoed down the hallway. The surgeon, a tall man with silver-flecked hair and a disciplined stoop born from decades of leaning over operating tables, entered with a clipboard. His weary expression softened when he saw Ethan awake, surrounded by warmth and fur. "She made it through the night," he said. Ethan closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "She'll be unconscious for a while," the doctor continued, "but the worst is behind her." Ethan looked down at the 3 pups, now asleep against his lap, and felt something he had not felt in years. Relief with no bitterness attached. He stroked the white puppy's head. "Time to give you a real name." The tiny ears twitched. The black and tan pups stirred. He touched each head in turn. "You," he whispered to the white pup, "are hope, because you gave her some when she had none left." The puppy blinked, as if understanding. He looked to the livelier black and tan pup. "You're Rio. Fast, hungry, chaotic, like a river that never stops moving." Rio kicked his rear leg in a dream, as if agreeing. Then the quiet one. "You," Ethan said softly, "are Shadow. Steady, watchful, always behind the others, but never truly gone." The shy pup pressed its nose into his palm. Behind him, the operators smiled, some embarrassed by how deeply the moment hit them. Then came the moment none of them expected. Ethan whispered toward the white pup, "Hey, Hope." Hope lifted its tiny head, ears twitching, and, clearer than any sound it had made before, released a soft, deliberate "hey." The room erupted. Laughter. Shouts. Disbelief layered with pure joy. Even the surgeon clutched the doorway, stunned. Outside, snow tapped softly against the window pane. Inside, for the first time in days, maybe months, the field medical station felt less like a battlefield and more like a home. Morning light spilled gently across the recovery wing, soft and pale against the frosted windows. The storm had passed, but the cold clung to the building like a second skin. Ethan Cross stepped quietly into Maya Reyes's room, cradling 3 tiny German Shepherd puppies wrapped in a silver rescue blanket. In his other hand, he carried a steaming cup of strong black coffee, the kind field medics brewed to keep their hearts beating. Maya, propped slightly against her pillows, looked smaller than she had inside the wrecked truck. Her dark braid had been redone by the nurses, though a few strands escaped, falling across her cheek like loose brushstrokes. Her olive-toned skin was still pale beneath the bruises. A bandage crossed her brow, but her eyes, deep brown and fiercely alive, brightened the moment she saw the puppies. The white one, Hope, wriggled free first, scrambling up Ethan's arm until he set the bundle gently onto her lap. Maya pressed her palm to his warm fur, and tears sprang suddenly to her eyes. "They made it," she whispered, voice hoarse with relief. "All of them." Ethan nodded. "Because you did." Maya shook her head, blinking through emotion. When she spoke again, her voice carried the steady courage of someone accustomed to facing danger alone in the wilderness. "In the old lookout cabin," she began, "I found a wooden crate just sitting under the stairs. No footprints, no tools, just the box." She closed her eyes as if forcing herself back into the memory. "When I opened it, these 3 were inside, barely 5 weeks old, shivering so hard the box rattled." Hope nudged her hand as if verifying the story. "I couldn't leave them," Maya continued. "So I wrapped them in my jacket and started driving toward the ranger station. But halfway down the ridge, the ground just gave out. Ice cracked like glass under the tires. The truck slid, hit the rock, and Her breath trembled. "I don't remember the impact, only that I held the crate tight so they wouldn't be thrown around." She reached for Hope and brushed her nose against his forehead. "MQ, tuinyamot lan," she murmured softly. "Roy, tuinya, kulai zurung. Kong bangnya?" Hope let out a tiny chirp, almost approving. Ethan felt the moment settle in the room like warmth from a fire, quiet, fragile, binding. Later that afternoon, as Maya rested with the puppies nestled beside her, a knock sounded at the door. Ethan straightened instinctively, hand brushing the edge of the IV pole like it were holstering a rifle. A man stepped inside, tall, lean, mid-50s, with silver hair swept back and intelligent lines around his eyes. He wore a navy wool coat over a dress shirt, a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. His presence carried the calm authority of someone who had spent decades turning observation into science. Professor Alan Whitaker. Ethan recognized him immediately, a behavioral researcher attached to the military working dog program at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. Whitaker had once taught a lecture Ethan attended during canine cross-training, explaining how dogs interpret tone and emotional frequency. Ethan remembered him as patient, analytical, and slightly eccentric in a way geniuses often were. "Cross," Whitaker greeted with a warm, measured voice. "I heard you found something remarkable." His gaze shifted to Hope, who sat perched on Maya's lap like a tiny white sentinel. The professor approached slowly, not wanting to startle the puppy. His face softened with wonder. My, you're even smaller than they said." Hope blinked, lifting one ear, curious. Whitaker retrieved a small tone whistle from his pocket and produced 3 soft frequencies, one high, one medium, one low. Hope tilted his head at each sound, responding only when the 3rd tone fell into a specific cadence. The puppy gave a short, breathy "Hep" in the same rhythm. Maya gasped. Ethan crossed his arms, more intrigued than surprised. Whitaker then asked Ethan, "Would you mind? Say the word you used on the helicopter." Ethan leaned forward. "Hey!" Hope perked up and answered, "Hey," the syllable airy but unmistakably shaped. Whitaker inhaled sharply, eyes lighting with academic excitement. "What we're seeing," he explained, "is not understanding of language. It's acoustic imitation, rare in dogs, especially ones this young." He gestured thoughtfully. "Most puppies can mimic emotional tone, but precise mirroring of pitch and duration? Extraordinary." He scribbled notes rapidly, then looked between Ethan and Maya. "This ability could be foundational," he said. "Imagine search and rescue missions where a dog vocalizes alerts with recognizable patterns, or disaster operations where tone-based responses help locate survivors." Hope yawned, unaware of the magnitude he represented. That evening, Whitaker returned, clipboard in hand, demeanor more formal. "After reviewing the data," he said, "I would like to request Hope for the Canine Special Development Program. It's a rigorous environment, high discipline, high expectation, but animals with unique neurological traits can flourish there. We could cultivate abilities none of us yet understand." He folded his hands. "Ethan, Maya, may I have your permission to bring Hope into the program?" The room stilled. Hope looked up at them, eyes bright, trusting, unaware that its future now hung in the space between two human hearts. And that was where the question stayed. Suspended, unanswered. The room fell still the moment Professor Alan Whitaker finished his proposal. The morning sun filtered through the blinds in thin, golden slits, settling across the white sheets of Maya Reyes's hospital bed. Hope lay curled beside her hip, half asleep, one tiny ear twitching every time someone shifted in the room. Rio and Shadow snored quietly in the basket near Ethan's boots, unaware that their brother's future was being debated. Whitaker adjusted his glasses, watching Hope with analytical intensity. His posture, straight spine, clasped hands, calm expression, gave him the air of a man used to being obeyed, or at least thoroughly listened to. He wasn't unkind, just shaped by years of pursuit in laboratories and training yards where dogs were molded into tools of service. Ethan stood near the window, arms crossed, the outline of his shoulders sharp in the morning light. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held something protective, something he hadn't felt in years. Before either he or Maya could speak, Hope lifted his head. A shift in the air, a tiny intake of breath. Then, sudden, startling, full of conviction from a body barely larger than a canteen, "No, no." The sound was imperfect, gravel soft, but unmistakably shaped. It echoed off the sterile walls, landing like a verdict none of them had expected. Hope pressed himself against Maya's hand, then scooted backward until his small frame found Ethan's boot, leaning against it as though anchoring himself between the two people who had carried him through the darkest hours of his short life. Whitaker exhaled, surprised but not offended. His silver eyebrows rose slightly, the corners of his mouth softening with something like reluctant admiration. "Well," he said gently, "I suppose that answers the question better than either of you could." Maya ran her fingers through Hope's fur. Her voice was still thin from her injuries, but steady. "He's been through enough labs for one lifetime, even if he never meant to be in any of them." Ethan stepped forward, lowering himself to one knee so his eyes were level with Whitaker's. "Professor," he said, voice low but firm, "Hope gave us everything he had. More than any dog should ever have to. He's not meant for cages or clipped routines. He deserves a life that lets him stay him." Whitaker held Ethan's gaze. For a long moment neither spoke. Then the professor sighed softly, nodding with a small, understanding smile. "I won't argue," he said. "Sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't the ones we keep, but the ones we learn to let go." His eyes warmed as he looked at Hope. "Take good care of him. He's remarkable. And he chose you." 3 weeks later, Maya Reyes was discharged with a brace on her leg and strict instructions to avoid field patrols for at least 2 months. The ranger station at the forest's edge welcomed her back with a handmade banner signed by locals. co-workers and a few overenthusiastic schoolchildren who had heard about the talking puppy. Hope, Rio, and Shadow became instant legends. Rio, energetic, always hungry, followed rangers around the station like a bouncing shadow. Shadow, quiet, loyal, spent his days lying beneath Maya's desk, ears reacting to every shift of wind outside. Hope, however, settled into a role no one fully expected. He became the heart of the place. Rangers returning from cold, exhausting patrols were greeted by a small white blur barreling into their legs. Children visiting from the nearby school were allowed to pet him, and Hope, who had once trembled in the snow, now lay on his back demanding belly rubs from every 8-year-old in sight. Maya and the station staff built a small community room dedicated to helping abandoned wildlife. A large wooden sign was hung above the door, carved by a retired ranger with calloused hands and a gentle smile, Hope's Haven, home for the forgotten. People from the town soon arrived with blankets, pet food, even handmade toys. Some brought animals needing care. Others simply came seeking the comfort of the place. Somehow, Hope always knew whom to sit beside. Lonely widowers, anxious teenagers, people who had lost something, all found a bit of warmth in a puppy who once survived by clinging to Hope himself. Ethan visited whenever he had leave from SEAL Team 5. The station almost felt like a second home now. Sometimes he taught Rio and Shadow simple canine commands: sit, stay, heel, which usually ended with all 3 puppies tackling him into the snow, while Maya laughed so hard she doubled over. In those moments, the tension he carried dissolved. The world grew softer. One evening, near dusk, the two stood on the wooden porch of the ranger station. Snow drifted lazily from the tall pines, glowing under the lantern that hung by the door. Inside, the 3 puppies slept near the stove, curled together like a single heartbeat. Maya slipped her hand gently into Ethan's. "If I hadn't stopped for them," she said quietly, voice thick with emotion, "I don't think I'd still be here." Ethan squeezed her hand, gaze fixed on the small sleeping shapes inside. "And if Hope hadn't found me," he replied, "I'd still be lost in that forest, maybe in more ways than one." Maya leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. The forest wind hummed softly. The snow fell without sound. Somewhere behind them, Hope stirred, letting out a soft, contented hey. In his sleep, a simple, imperfect melody, a reminder that not all miracles speak clearly, some only whisper. In the quiet glow of that ranger station, as snow drifted past the windows and 3 small puppies slept safely by the fire, one truth became clear. Miracles don't always arrive with thunder or angels or voices from the sky. Sometimes they come wrapped in fur, trembling in the cold, whispering only the smallest sounds. Hey. Help? No. Yet carrying a power far greater than words. Many believe God works through grand signs, but more often he works through the unnoticed, the fragile, the easily overlooked. A stranger who stops to help, a moment of courage in the dark, a tiny life that turns 2 wandering souls into a family. Hope was just a puppy, but through him, 2 broken hearts found new purpose. Through him, a woman lived. Through him, a warrior remembered he was more than a shadow in the storm. And maybe that's what God's miracles truly are. Ordinary moments that become extraordinary when love chooses to answer. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about the small miracles you've seen in your own life, the moments where you felt God nudging you through kindness, courage, or compassion. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel so our little community can keep growing. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide your steps, today and always.